Welcome, everyone. My name is Ian Waits, and I'm the Dean of Engineering at MIT, and it's my great pleasure on behalf of the Institute to welcome you to this celebration of 50 years of entrepreneurship at MIT, and a celebration as well, of course, of Ed Roberts. I wanted to launch things and by talking a little bit about the history, the current, and the future of entrepreneurship at MIT. And as you'll see, it's very much linked to Ed and ties between the School of Engineering and the Sloan School of Management, as well as a really healthy dose of the School of Science, part of the collaborative nature we have at MIT. So I wanted to start out with the past. And this, of course, is a set of images of the moon landing. And I think one of the interesting features of entrepreneurship at MIT is that we still talk about things not as unicorns, but as moonshots. MIT is the only university that can say that we really did a moonshot. Right? So individuals here are some of the people involved, but on the bottom sort of right-hand corner there is Bob Siemens, who went on to have my job as Dean of Engineering, but at the time they're shown with von Braun and JFK, of course, was the Deputy Administrator for NASA and essentially the Chief Engineer for the Apollo program, including setting the architecture for how we would get there. Above him is Doc Draper, who did the computer system guidance, navigation, and control, and got the first contract for the Apollo program, which was a paragraph long from Congress at the time. So government contracts have changed. And Buzz Aldrin, who's an MIT alum there. So we had a very large role within the Apollo program. But there's a closer tie to entrepreneurship at MIT that I wanted to share with you. JFK gave his going to the moon speech in May of 1961. I think it was May 25th, 1961. July 1, 1961, Ed Roberts started at MIT as a young assistant professor. 2 years-ish after that, Ed can correct me if I have it wrong, NASA asked Ed to help him justify government spending on research and technology as it relates to producing broader economic impacts. Obviously something that's very much in Ed's wheelhouse. And Ed called up Doc Draper, who was a larger-than-life figure at the time. Still is for people like me who are from aeronautics and astronautics. To give you a measure of it, Doc's research was half of all research volume on campus. Okay? Makes Bob Langer look like a little boy. Half of all research volume on campus. And Ed said, Doc, can I study, the work of your lab and what sort of innovations and spin-offs it has led to? And Doc sort of welcomed him with open arms. And Ed found, I think, 39 spin-offs from work in Doc's lab, and went on from there, obviously, to study many more things about entrepreneurship. But I think it's a nice punctuation point that even back before all of the sort of initiatives and efforts on entrepreneurship, MIT had a very significant impact on creating new companies. And Ed was the first person to, I think, really document that in a rigorous way. So that's the past. If we flash forward to the present, there is a lot obviously happening in Kendall Square. And I think an interesting thing to note about all of the companies moving around campus, and many of those that started, is that a lot of these were in fact led by people from the School of Science. Right? So the biotech cluster here was very much driven by having an exceptionally strong School of Science. And I say that as the head of the School of Engineering. But this is now on a roll. I mean, it just keeps going. And we continue to invest in this area. And the people that were graduating are people like Leslie Dewan. Leslie leads Transatomic Power, which is a startup that's focused on molten salt nuclear reactors. So, you know, if iPhone apps are here, molten salt nuclear reactors are like here, right? This is what you call tough tech, and, you know, billions of dollars of investment, you know, decades, and she's doing it here in Cambridge, and not because she doesn't understand that, but because she's committed to doing really big world-changing things that you might regard as moonshot character things. So Leslie and others are part of that future of entrepreneurship. And this is one of the charts from Ed's recent study, which shows the rate at which people are, or the age at which people are beginning their first startup is getting younger and younger. And there's some sort of right censoring bias in this, because the people who haven't yet started companies, but who might when they're 50, we don't pick up in this. But still, the trend is nonetheless sort of obvious in and around our campus and many campuses across the US and the world, of people doing things at younger and younger ages, right? So there is a huge wave of people who are interested in entrepreneurial activity. And they're now coming into a very different ecosystem, right? So the organization that sort of started this, now called the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship, which Ed created, now has sisters across all of MIT, many different sort of types and styles, and the students have a lot of different opportunities. And we now have the Innovation Initiative being jointly led by two associate deans, one from Sloan, Fiona Murray. I saw Fiona here someplace floating around, and Vladimir Bulovich from the School of Engineering, who works with me. So it really does reflect this strong partnership, which perhaps began in 1964, or roughly when it was, when Ed Roberts walked into Doc Draper's office and got a really warm welcome for working together to understand the impact of Doc's work. And I wanted to highlight two just specific things about this to give you an idea of the breadth of activities. The first really shows how we're stretching ourselves sort of further along the runway for companies to start. And that's that we launched something called the Engine, which will be an incubator which will benefit MIT, but many other sort of companies and organizations within the Cambridge area. And it will be focused on providing patient capital and space and facilities for tough tech startups in the area. And it's a very significant investment by MIT and others to elevate the region around us. So this effort to build a stronger and stronger entrepreneurial ecosystem continues. And then all the way on the other end, if you think about this as maybe sort of getting very close to sort of successful companies, all the way on the other end, we're working to increase the funnel through which students will engage in entrepreneurship. And one of these is the Sandbox Innovation Fund program, where we currently now have about $2 million a year that we write in small checks to MIT student-based innovative startups and ideas, between $1,000 and $25,000 for each of these. And it launched 9 months ago, and we already have about 500 kids involved in it, right? So it's really on a wonderful trajectory. So both at the sort of wide early end of the funnel and at the sort of later end of the funnel, we're doing things to continue to advance in entrepreneurship within MIT and around MIT and Cambridge. And I wanted to leave with just one specific example, because I think it punctuates some of this a little bit about the nature of some of the work that's done. So on the right is Dexter Aang, and I'll tell you the story of this startup. Dexter was an MIT undergrad in mechanical engineering and went off to be a high-frequency trader in Chicago. And shortly after that, he lost his mother to ALS. And he, at that point, decided, I need to do something to help address this problem. And one of the problems is that people who have ALS have a relatively short time, many of them do, to communicate. And the way they communicate now is with eye tracking software. They basically type out letters and words by moving their eyes along a screen. And the hardware for that's about $17,000. And it works for about 10% of the people, or works well for about 10% of the people. And when you have 2 or 3 years left to communicate with the people you love, communication is a really important objective. And Dexter decided he would come back to MIT, and he's now back at MIT taking classes, and work to solve that problem. And he's partnered with a few people here. One of them here, Bobby Foster, and his wife, Casey Forster, learned actually about 2 months before they were engaged that Bobby had ALS. And of course, married now, and it's about 2 years later, and Bobby is a key member of this team. So let me tell you what they're doing to try and improve the communications. They sort of said, well, maybe the electrical signals that aren't strong enough or organized enough to control your movements are still there, and we can put some cheap, electrical, pads on your skin and pick those up and do the signal processing and get a faster, better, cheaper way for people to communicate. And they've tested this out and shown that with appropriate signal processing, it works. Right? And so now Dexter is on a very rapid run to try and address this problem with this company. If you're interested in impact philanthropy, I can put you in touch with Dexter because he's trying to find funding for a clinical trial with MGH that will happen next year. But this was one of the projects that was funded out of the Sandbox Fund, focused on MIT students trying to do good things to save the world. So there's just a lot of wonderful things happening on campus, around campus, and outside campus. And it would just, I think, not have been catalyzed anywhere to the degree it is without Ed Roberts here to really sort of move it along. And I would love to think it was just you walking into Doc Draper's office that was the catalyst. I know there was much more associated with it than that. But for me as an aerospace guy, it just makes me proud that we're a small part of that story. So Ed?